Welcome to the Healthy Relationships Initiative podcast. Our goal is to provide information and tools to help you build happier, healthier, and safer relationships of all kinds. To learn more about HRI, please visit www.guilfordhri.org and check us out on social media at GuilfordHRI. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Healthy Relationships Initiative Relationship Booster. We're really glad that you're here with us today. We're going to start out talking a little bit about the Healthy Relationships Initiative. My name is Christine Murray. I'm the director of the Healthy Relationships Initiative, as well as the director of the UNC Greensboro Center for Youth, Family, and Community Partnerships. The Healthy Relationships Initiative is a partnership between UNC Greensboro and the Phillips Foundation, and our mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds in Guilford County and beyond. Please feel free to check out our website at guilfordhri.org to learn more about HRI, as well as we'd love for you to connect with us on social media at GuilfordHRI. Before we get started, just a few kind of housekeeping things to go through. We do have the chat room, which we invite you to share some questions with us throughout the program, and we do try to answer those as we're able to throughout the program. As well as at the end of the program, before you sign off, please take a moment to fill out our feedback form so you can give us some feedback to help us improve these programs in the future. Our topic for today's Healthy Relationships Initiative Relationship Booster is effective co-parenting after divorce. And we know this is a complicated topic, and we hope that it's one that we'll be able to share some helpful strategies to help people who are facing this situation. And our guest expert for today is Amanda Kirby. So Amanda, thanks so much for being here with us. Amanda, could you tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you do, and especially maybe any related experience or professional work that you've done on this topic?
Yeah, so I have been working in a private practice setting since 2005. Started in a group practice and have since transitioned to my own. My degree was in marriage and family counseling. So that has been, an ongoing interest of mine, working with families. I've seen lots and lots and lots, and of course I've seen some really healthy families and then some really, unhealthy dynamics developed. And along with that, this whole idea of co-parenting, seen some really great examples of co-parenting and some really unhealthy examples. So it's been kind of like a passion point for me. Amongst other things, working with younger kids, adolescents, and adults. But I just feel like families of all varieties need support these days. There's just a lot of hard stuff that goes on. So it's something that I just feel really interested in and strongly about.
And I'm really glad that you're starting off by mentioning that in your counseling practice, you'll see people who are doing well with this issue and the co-parenting, and people who are struggling. And I think that's a really important thing for people to remember, that you can reach out for help to help you even when things are going well, because this is a difficult experience for people, even under the best of circumstances.
And in fact, whenever there is a separation or divorce happening, I always suggest, even kids who are well-adjusted, to find a counselor or as a family to seek that support, because you just never know what might come up, and it's always helpful to have that resource on hand as needed.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that professional support later, but it's a great thing to start with too, because I think a lot of times people might have the misconception that counseling is only if things are really going badly. And the truth is that, especially when you're dealing with something like divorce and post-divorce adjustment and co-parenting, it's going to be difficult no matter what. So keeping that option open. So let's start out by just kind of big picture thinking about this topic. So obviously this is a topic that can be really difficult to navigate, so we're glad you're here to talk with us about it. Starting off on a more positive note, what would you say are some of the benefits for parents who are able to co-parent effectively, and why that's so important for their kids?
Yeah, I think like right off the bat, the number one and biggest outcome is a child's adjustment. There is a direct relationship between effective co-parenting and a child's emotional well-being, their mental health, their academic success, their ability to problem solve and cope with big emotions. So that for me is like the obvious big picture, right? What we're hoping for with an effective co-parenting relationship. But there's other benefits too, like a stronger sense of security and stability for kids, which is super important. they need to feel like there are people out there that they can trust, you know, and that tends to happen more in a positive co-parenting relationship. You know, this whole idea of kind of modeling for our kids, which we can do at any time, it doesn't really matter what's going on, but if you have two parents who are willing to model effective communication and conflict resolution skills, their kids are more likely to emulate that and mimic that. So that's really important for them as a benefit. And I also think that the relationships between kids and their parents are much better if there's a healthy co-parenting dynamic. Kids are more likely to be open to their parents. They're more likely to communicate with them about things, which I think, especially as you get up into adolescence, can be really helpful. It kind of decreases the chance for some adolescent risk-taking behavior if there is that good, healthy dynamic between parents.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I love that you focused on so many possible benefits for the kids, because obviously that is, for most parents, the most important thing. But also, I think, to add to that, just a benefit even for the parents themselves, that having more cooperation and coordination in that reduces a lot of stress that can come up, too. So it's really something that can benefit the whole family. Yeah. So that's great. So what does it even look like then to have positive? What does a positive co-parenting relationship look like?
Yeah. So in thinking about this question, I actually came up with like a ton of things.
Yeah.
And I recognize that not every co-parenting dynamic is going to meet all these criteria necessarily. You know, it might ebb and flow, but I think this is kind of like the sure to model, so to speak. So clear boundaries. Because a lot of times, you know, we have these unresolved feelings as we enter into this new stage of our relationship. So co-parents who are doing it well will have healthy boundaries between them. They're going to understand their new roles, right? And stay as kid-focused as they can be. I think they're also going to promote consistency between homes, which is super important for kids. Clear rules, expectations, limits that are similar from home to home. That's obviously in the best interest of the child. A healthy co-parenting dynamic is one where there's like a predetermined schedule, you know, so kids can count on where they're going, and parents too. I mean, it's helpful to know what's coming and who gets who when and who's taking who where, that kind of thing. And if there is ever a need to alter the routine, effective co-parents are going to talk first about it with each other in private, not in front of the kids. And also kind of defer to one another first, like a first right of refusal kind of thing. If the schedule needs to change, offer to the other parent first to take the kids, you know, if something does come up. So that kind of gets us started. But then we kind of venture into some other things, like in a perfect world, there's going to be agreement between the parents on most things. And if there's not agreement, then at least compromise or willingness to compromise. So I think about things like education or health decisions, religious upbringing, discipline. You know, again, maybe co-parents don't see eye to eye on all of that stuff, but at least they have a willingness to work together and compromise. So that's also kind of a sign of a healthy relationship. You know, efforts to manipulate the kids, not speaking disparagingly about one another in front of the kids, being respectful, all those things. I think are also really important. I mean, we could go on and on. But, you know, one of the things I think is most important, and this sounds so easy a theory, but if the kids think that their parents get along, I feel like that's a really great sign that the kids are doing something
That's a good
well.
way to think about it, and really thinking what from the kids' perspective, and that can be a helpful piece for parents to really give some thought to, maybe not necessarily asking them if it comes up, or if they ask them that is, you know, possible, but it could just even be thinking about, you know, if I was my child, how would I be viewing this situation? Is it a good dynamic for me? Is it uncomfortable? And then really looking at that. But I really appreciate how you kind of pointed out the many levels at which this happens, and especially pointing out that it doesn't mean that they have to agree on everything. But that there's a willingness to work through things in a respectful way. Because even if we've got happily married parents, for example, or happily partnered parents, they're not going to agree on everything either. And so it's not realistic to think that it's going to be 100% of a match. But in a healthy parenting, co-parenting relationship in any context, really working through that is important. But I also like the points you brought up about consistency and stability. communicating directly between the parents before not kind of triangulating and pulling the kids in and trying to manipulate them.
And sharing information is really important, like not expecting the kids to be the go-between.
Right.
I think also, you know, is a really important sign of a good parenting relationship.
I'm so glad we're starting here because I think that with this being such a complicated topic, we can think a lot about the challenges, and we're about to get right into that. But it's important to know that it is possible to have a positive co-parenting relationship and to do this effectively, and that it's something that really can be beneficial for the children.
Right. It might be hard at times, but it's so worth it.
Yeah.
To try, you know?
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about some of the challenges or the barriers, because we know now we're sort of starting with this vision of this positive, what it could look like for people. And yet, a lot of times it doesn't necessarily come to that. And I think the way we just describe it is sort of like the ideal, and most people probably fall, you know, somewhere kind of below that. But what are some of the barriers or the challenges that can make it difficult for people to really achieve that vision?
I mean, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is just the idea of unresolved things, right? So if one or both of the parents is carrying forward some anger, resentment, feelings of betrayal or abandonment, you know, obviously that can be difficult. So how do we deal with that? I know we're going to talk some more about that in a few minutes, and there's lots of ways to address that stuff. But that's a huge barrier.
Probably, if you boil down to a lot of the challenges, probably one of the main ones. I mean, it's probably underlies on some level all of that, because I mean, just let's face it, adjusting to life after a divorce is very difficult for people, and it is a huge emotional experience that takes a long time to heal. And kind of while you're healing from that process, you're also thrust into the situation of needing to co-parent at the same time.
Exactly. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on a parent, you know, to kind of do it well and still be all together for their kids.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot to ask.
Yeah, it really
especially
is.
in the early stages.
Are there other barriers that you can think of too, or is that,
I mean, so the other thing that comes to my mind is anger or resentment around like a custody arrangement. And a lot of times, you know, these cases, if they go to court, stay stuck in the legal system for months or years even.
Right.
So, I mean, imagine the tension that can kind of continue as you're kind of contending with that stress, or if you're feeling like it's not working out the way you want, or even just like the amount of money that we spend in the legal system around child custody. I mean, that can be a huge barrier to parenting well.
So it could be financial stress, which might impact people's either overall kind of well-being, or it could mean they have to work extra. Even that can happen even post-divorce if there's not custody issues.
Exactly.
And I think too, I'm glad you brought up the custody issues, because in many ways, the custody court process can be very adversarial, and I'm sure you've seen that a lot in your clinical work, but it really makes it difficult to co-parent, whether you're going through that at the present moment or after it's resolved. It's really set you up as, you know, one person versus another person, which is how the court plays out, and it can really make it more difficult to do that co-parenting.
So that's another big barrier. A parent's mental health. Something else that can present a barrier, or if they have medical issues that are ongoing, that may be the ability to be as active of a parent. I think that's a big barrier. Guilt, I think, is another barrier for parents. You know, if the relationship with your ex didn't end the way you want it to, there can be a lot of feelings about how that is changing your whole ideal, you know, and vision for your future, and of course kids' well-being, and I think that can almost lead to like some overcompensating or overindulging behaviors with kids that can present a barrier if the other person doesn't agree with that.
Yeah, that's a good point, and especially for people who may not have wanted the divorce and not being able to kind of accept that it, for whatever reason, it is the reality of the circumstances, and so if they're still really not having grieved that loss or just even accepted that this is the way that it is, that it can really lead to either overcompensating or undercompensating, or feeling, you know, or just feeling like, well, it's never going to be what it was going to be, so, you know, we're just doomed to kind of have a really bad family life for the rest of the time. And that can be difficult for people.
Very difficult.
Would you add to, because I think a huge barrier can also be other people. It could be extended family. It could be a new boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse that comes on the scene, and especially if those people aren't on board.
Yeah, I mean, we might get some flack from the people in our lives for whatever the reason, you know. And I definitely think new relationships can be, unfortunately, a bit of a barrier. You know, sometimes because the parent is spending too much time and attention on the relationship and not on the kids, so obviously that creates problems. Or if you have a step parent or a new relationship partner who's really not vested in your kids, you know, who might have issues of jealousy or their own resentment, you know, and wanting time and attention. So, people is a big area.
So I think another challenge can really be, and a lot of times when you see ineffective, I guess is the right word, ineffective co-parenting after divorce. A lot of times, sometimes it's both people, nobody's willing to cooperate.
Right.
But I've seen a lot in my work that it's like one person wants to cooperate, one person really wants to work together, but there's a real lack of willingness on one part. And so could you talk a little bit about how people can sort of navigate that? Especially, I mean, I would assume people who are tuning into this program most likely are going to be the ones that want that positive co-parenting relationship. So how do you deal with somebody if you are in a situation where you really are willing to work on it, you want to work on it, the other person isn't?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably a very discouraging and frustrating experience, you know, because it could be so different. So with that, I think it's a really strong need to just accept that you can't change that other person. And no amount of coaxing them or encouraging them or, you know, yelling at them is going to change it.
Right.
So kind of keeping calm, being patient, but also still being hopeful because people can change,
That's
right? Like, and there's always an opportunity, I think, for a dynamic shift in a better direction. So again, I come back to like this idea of clear and consistent, stable boundaries, not taking on what anger or animosity you might be feeling from that other person who's not so willing to be in a positive parenting dynamic.
Yeah.
You know, sticking to facts, not allowing your own emotions. Like, it would be very natural for that person to feel defensive at times, but not matching the other person's intensity.
Right. Yeah, learning effective ways of responding.
Exactly.
And I think that's such a good point to be able to say, like, okay, I can accept it's not, and really not comparing, because I think sometimes people can see we're looking over at this other family where the co-parents are, you know, hanging out together, they're celebrating holidays together. You really might not even realize they're divorced if you don't know. And to not compare yourself to anybody else, because you can't have, you can't automatically, like you're saying, force somebody else to kind of participate in an effective cooperative relationship. So really just accepting where they are and trying to work around it. And I'm glad you mentioned the hope piece too, because I do think that's important for people to remember that a lot of times co-parenting relationships start in one place and then they can end in a very different place, especially when some of those initial emotional issues get resolved. But it sounds like a good strategy for somebody who wants that positive relationship but the other person doesn't, is just to really work on their own boundaries, probably turning to their own support, like find people, whether it's a counselor, a friend, somebody that you can vent to, but then learning not to engage, or you don't vent back to the person who doesn't want to cooperate.
Yeah, like two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah,
you know? So it is important, if you're really hopeful that that positive parent relationship can develop in time, just to kind of be patient through the process. And
figure out what values are important to you and stick to that no matter what, because that other person may not participate. So let's talk a little bit about that issue of past hurts, because I think that's a common thing. Probably almost anybody coming out of a divorce or the end of a significant relationship, there's going to be a lot of emotions, and especially when there's kids involved. So if somebody does find that they're having negative emotions toward their former partner that they really feel are coming in the way, or there's just evidence that it's sort of getting in the way of their ability to co-parent, what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned using resources, and that for me is a big deal. You know, like, you don't have to fight this alone, so to speak. doesn't just have to be in a counseling environment, although a lot of people prefer that because it's private, one-on-one, that kind of thing. But other group forums, like divorce care is a great program for people who are starting in separation or divorce, to not only get some education and information, but also to be able to share, process what's going on. Taking time for yourself, pursuing, good self-care and wellness activities, I think is also really important, finding those outlets. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think whatever it takes to kind of stay kid-focused and not allow those feelings to get in the middle of what could be a better parenting relationship, which adversely affect the kids.
So it could even be something like for the person to come up with some steps that they take or some little reminder if they feel themselves getting emotional dealing with that person, to say, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes before I respond to any email, or I'm going to journal or talk to a friend before I call to engage in this conflict. So, kind of making sure that there's some space and not letting those emotions override.
Right, like almost practicing really effective stress management.
Right.
In the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you talk to people face-to-face with that person on an ongoing basis.
And those words you used, in the moment, made me really think, like, there's really the in the moment, and then there's the bigger picture healing. So there's kind of these immediate sort of moment-to-moment kind of emotions that can come up that can impact the effectiveness of the co-parenting. But then there's also the big picture healing, kind of the grieving or the really working through the emotional responses. Yeah, it's like really separating that out for people can be helpful to say, okay, I need these immediate strategies, but all the immediate strategies in the world aren't probably going to fully help me do the healing. And so bringing in some of that intentional resources to say, okay, I need to get healing about this.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and in the moment, we might find that our efforts are successful, like really working on our listening skills and making requests of the other person, not demanding things from them, kind of tuning into what, again, is in our kids' best interest and understanding that if we veer too far away from that, maybe we do need to utilize other support. And actually, there's kind of this interesting type of co-parenting now that's come to be called parallel parenting. Have you heard of that before?
Can you explain it, though?
Yeah. So parallel parenting is an intentional decision to choose less direct forms of communication to share information between parents. So if you're finding that you're just not getting anywhere, or you can't just stay kid-focused on conversations that kind of deter back to other things, it's probably not good or effective to continue to try the face-to-face or on the phone kind of conversation. So trying to find other ways, a lot of times they're electronic, emailing or texting versus phone calls as an example, or choosing someone to help facilitate drop-offs and pickups, that kind of thing. And it doesn't have to last forever. It can be a temporary solution until both parents feel like they're ready to start parenting better with each other.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to bring up here, because we think the ideal would be that there's similar rules at both houses, and there is this, frequent communication, and it's healthy communication about all these decisions. But for parents who are really not finding themselves able to do that, establishing this sort of parallel parenting where it is kind of like one person does their thing, the other person does their thing. Hopefully there's at least some shared values, but one thing that can be helpful for parents to remember, if that ends up being the most useful situation for a time, would be if you think about your kids, you have different rules and it's a different environment at home versus what they're experiencing at school. It's a different environment, and so kids don't have to have the exact same environment in every setting that they're in, right? They can adjust to different rules because they're kind of used to doing that. So it would be important to explain and make clear what those rules are, but also to be able to, kind of for parents to maybe release some of that feeling like everything has to be exactly the same all the time, or we have to be aligned on everything. Like the bedtime has to be exactly the same at both houses. Well, maybe it's okay if it's at 8:30 at one house and 7:30 at the other house. Like that might be okay, and that's kind of a real basic example of parallel parenting, which says that each person has their own set of kind of rules.
Yeah, and that they still are committed to sharing, you know, but just in a way that promotes less conflict.
Right.
The goal of parallel parenting is to avoid conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's actually this really cool resource out there called Our Family Wizard.
Oh, no, I haven't heard that. No.
So I've had clients use it and also some friends in the situation use it. So I did a little investigating coming here. And it's this really neat platform that you subscribe to, essentially. And it's like one-stop shopping for parallel parenting. So in the program is a calendar. So both parents can add dates to the calendar so everybody can see it shared. There's a secure messaging feature. So a lot of times, especially in high conflict custody cases, there's concern over tampering of the evidence, like how are emails altered after the fact or deleted mysteriously, that kind of stuff. So this is an encrypted, protected, secure messaging system so they can exchange information. There's also a journal and a place to upload photos. You can share memories or experiences. There's an expense log to enter in financial stuff. Parents are sharing in that. And an information bank. So if you're putting in, you know, like immunization records or grades or things that both parents should know about.
Wow.
So I just thought that was a really cool option.
What did you say it's called again?
It's called Our Family Wizard.
Our Family Wizard.
Yeah.
Seems like that actually might be helpful for some non-divorced families where people are kind of
organized and
because that sort of communication can be complicated even in a, you know, sort of a well-functioning relationship that still exists. So that's, well, and that's a great example. That's just one example. I think there's other apps and other resources and tools that are out there. But for people, that is helpful. So, you know, in terms of kind of thinking about navigating conflict, I think one thing that can be helpful for, that type of tool, is helping to prevent conflict, right? So the more that you can kind of set yourself up using tools and resources and strategies for not having to debate every little thing, or, you know, if there's a shared schedule and it's so-and-so is going to pick up the child at 5 and the other person has on their calendar 5:30, that's a possible conflict, right? But if there's a shared calendar, then you might help prevent that. So are there other ways you can think of kind of maybe that are proactive to prevent conflict before it happens?
I mean, I think organization, like you said, and that doesn't have to just be in a calendar, but just be mindful of your own executive functioning kind of things. And, you know, planning ahead for changes, you know, like for a parent who travels on business, you know, it's not really helpful to spring that on the other parent last minute. So just being really mindful of projecting out to the future of it so you can anticipate changes and so kids can see what's coming.
Yeah, and that gives time to work through issues in a way that maybe feels less pressured because it's, oh, we've got a few months to make this decision, or we've got a few months to kind of evaluate this decision and work through it, versus like, oh, we got to make this decision by tomorrow, and that can lead to a lot of stress and frustration. So being organized, planning ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think about something else that's not really related to that, but just really tuning into where your kids are. You know, sometimes I think unfairly we assume that kids don't notice things, and I'm not quite sure how, like in this day and age, because they're picking up on everything. But if you're getting feedback from them, or if you're sensing that your interactions with your co-parent aren't working so well, like tune into that and take it seriously. Don't just deny it, don't dismiss it, you know. So again, like if you feel like it's coming to that for your kids and they're being adversely affected, then maybe ask for support, you know, reach out in other ways.
Yeah, I would add to kind of along those same lines of reaching out for support, especially for people who are really early in the process, maybe kind of newly divorced or newly separated, to really get good advice. And so that can come from a lot of different directions, but seeking out somebody who maybe has been divorced and co-parenting for several years, or a counselor who has experience, and legal counsel too, because I think one of the things that can really happen for people is you can avoid a lot of conflict the more you spell certain things out from the beginning. So, for example, holiday schedules, that can be huge, and it can either be something that is spelled out in advance, and so everybody knows. They may not like it every other Christmas or every other Thanksgiving or whatever, but at least they know what it is, versus when some of those kind of basic possible conflict issues aren't spelled out in advance, and it's like repeat conflict year after year or month after month or whatever that might look like. So, but a lot of times early in that process, you don't know what the issues are. You don't necessarily know unless you talk with somebody who's been living it or somebody who works with people every day to say, well, have you thought about the holiday schedule yet? Or here's what's worked for us in the holiday schedule. Because if you leave that stuff for chance or you kind of leave some of those things open, it leaves a lot more opportunities for conflict. But in many ways, the value of having a good lawyer or a good legal counsel who can really help you to kind of anticipate possible conflict areas and just settle them from the beginning.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, and there's also some other educational opportunities out there. There's a lot of co-parenting boot camps or other educational forums. So being proactive and going and attending something like that can be really helpful, because this kind of stuff will be hopefully be covered. Or, you know, reading books, you know, just educating yourself.
Yeah, and do not see it maybe as like a failure or there's something wrong with you if you can't hammer those things out, but to really just be able to say, like, this is going to help us, like, and we might be getting along great now. It might seem like, oh, we don't need to worry about the holiday schedule because I'm sure we'll be able to navigate that. There could be a new partner, there could be new conflicts that come up a year from there. And so the more that everything is just sort of planned ahead, organized from the beginning, that can really help too.
Yeah, and even though you might be separating in February and Christmas isn't, you know, for all these months, kids might still be anticipating this stuff. So again, kind of thinking about what's in their best interest. It's not going to be helpful to wait until the end of November to decide that. They need a chance to prepare for what's going to be different for them.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder that it's not just about conflict between the adults, it's also that sort of predictability and planning ahead is something that is in the best interest of the kids, so that they know what's coming, and that really helps them adjust too. So what about, so these are some helpful strategies for preventing conflict. But conflict will come up, of course. And I remember one person once said to me that the difference when you've got a sort of happily married couple versus a divorced couple or divorced co-parent is when some people are happily married, in theory they could sit down on the couch at the end of the day, share a glass of wine, maybe they've had conflict, or not a glass of wine, dessert, TV show, whatever it is they like to do to unwind, and, you know, reconnect. So kind of there's conflict and you're reconnecting. Whereas in a divorce situation, you are navigating the conflict and you're often not having those like friendly moments that are connected too. So with that in mind, understanding the sort of unique context for conflict when there's, you know, when there may not be other positive interactions between the people, what are some good basic kind of conflict management strategies?
So, you know, I kind of indicated before that it's really important to practice effective communication. So listening, you know, because when we're defensive, we tend to be kind of forming a rebuttal before we're actually like hearing what that person has said. So even though we might disagree about some things, or two co-parents might disagree, it's important to be willing to at least listen, hear what they have to say, and take it into consideration. I think I mentioned before, you know, making requests and not demands. Obviously, that will go over much better communication-wise. Being very motivated to stay in the moment, you know, and again, not let strong feelings overwhelm the situation. And if you need to pause, like a timeout, just as we would in a happily married couple, like you said, we might need to walk away, we might need to hang up the phone for a few minutes and kind of come back to this conversation at a later time. So kind of communication 101 stuff, I feel like it's super important. But then again, like working hard to seek compromise, having this acceptance and awareness that you're not going to agree on everything, you know, pick your battles. Not everything is worth fighting over.
That's a great point,
So, I mean, like you said, bedtime. You know, if we're talking about a difference of 4 hours, and I've heard that before, you know, like, Mom wants the kid to go to bed at 7:30 p.m. Dad doesn't care if the kid's up all night playing video games until 2 in the morning, and I'm not trying to discriminate gender-wise.
Could be the complete opposite. That's right. Yep.
That's a little different, but if we're off by 30 minutes or an hour, probably not a battle worth fighting.
Yeah, and even in those, even when it is something that is worth fighting, or maybe if it's a huge difference that seems to be impacting, I think understanding what your sort of rights are, your custody agreement too, because that obviously can impact things. I mean, if they're really, especially if they're in kind of maybe a parallel parenting type of situation, you can't force the other person to do that 7:30 bedtime.
Sure.
So maybe it's then figuring out, like making that request in a positive way, reapproaching the situation. Maybe the kid is suffering in their academic performance on days when they're, staying up so late or things like that. So bringing it up, presenting new information in a polite way, but then also kind of realizing that you can't force the other person to do anything about it. And I mean, it might be worth it in certain cases, especially if it's really something you feel is hurting the child, to seek legal counsel, especially before really engaging or considering that. But, that's not a route that probably most parents really want to go, to be battling things out. It's a last resort, but it could be worth it. And it could be if people are open to it, having either kind of divorce counseling, like finding a counselor who can help navigate that, or maybe a mediator, especially if there are a lot of issues like that. And especially, maybe not the bedtime, maybe that's not the best example, but I know sometimes for co-parents, something like what school will the kids attend? That's a huge one. And, that really is one that has a lot of implications for the child's development. It could have sort of timing, schedule implications. So there's just a lot in those kind of big picture ones. So possibly really involving professional help if you really can't seem to come to I guess part of the distinction too is there are some decisions where you can compromise, or you can say, well, at this house the bedtime's 7:30, at this other house it's 10 o'clock. But there you can have differences of opinion. But there are certain things, the kid can only go to one school. So some decisions they have to figure out.
Or medication, that's a big one. There's prescribed medication that one parent agrees with and the other parent doesn't. I mean, how detrimental is that for a child? To be on and off and on and off. So those, I think that is a good distinction. There are some things that really need to be settled.
Exactly.
And if you keep coming back to them over and over again and it's just not going anywhere, then you have to seek the support of someone else.
That's right. Yeah. And I think a lot of, just like you're saying, like really basic sort of conflict and communication skills, developing those. We do have a lot of resources through the Healthy Relationships Initiative that are available. We have some through our e-learning center and just other resources around really basic kind of relationship skills like that. Also, books can be a good source of support too, that sort of thing. But I think in terms of counseling, like now's the time to really put in the plug for counseling. So what do you see as the potential benefits of involving a counselor, especially around whether it is both people are willing to come in for counseling to help work through some things, or even if you're in a situation where you're just finding yourself in a lot of conflict and a lot of stress related to a co-parenting situation? What's the value for coming in for counseling there?
I mean, I think a huge value is just the opportunity to vent in a safe space, because even with people in our lives, our trusted family and friends, there is that lack of objectivity, and there's always a chance it's going to come back, As much as we want to trust our people, sometimes that doesn't always work out. And then, the implications of that is that our kids might hear or pick up on that stuff, right? So at least in a counseling environment, we know it's completely safe and protected. And I guess also too, just to kind of review what you think you might be skilling at in terms of communication and conflict resolution, but to be developing that skill set even further, and understanding maybe even more like what it is or who it is that you're dealing with, because unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, mental health is so pervasive now. It's not uncommon that one or both co-parents is going to be affected by that, And if we're talking about I'll think of an extreme case, but someone with a diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that is terribly challenging to deal with.
Right.
And I think we've got great communication skills, but still don't quite understand.
Yeah.
So I think there's value in just getting resources, using resources, and getting support around things like that.
And I just think about somebody who, especially for you being an experienced counselor, so people who can come in to talk with an experienced counselor like yourself who's seen a lot, you can really help people, or any counselor, not just you, obviously I'm sure you do a great job with it, but any counselor, you know, to be able to say like, okay, is this normal? Is this somebody that might have some sort of personality disorder or something, like to really give you that objective perspective, because it's one thing to talk about it with a friend who can say, oh yeah, that person's a real jerk, or they're, you know, they have, you know, they're kind of like armchair uninformed diagnosis that they've given the person, but to really be able to say like, well, this seems normal, or actually you're dealing with a sociopath here, you know, and like we need to really strategize, because realistically, I'm glad we're kind of touching on this. This is really important that, you know, we could say all the things in the world that you can possibly do, but sometimes you have to approach it differently, depending on, honestly, the type of person and the type of situation that you're dealing with, as well as, of course, like the age of the child and other factors like that. But some people, it would be unsafe if there's a history of domestic violence or abuse or some sort of personality disorder. You know, you have to have like proactive strategies so that you're not engaging in a situation that might put your emotional or even physical safety at risk. And so a counselor can really help you sort through that and even help you say, well, actually you might just be like a little sensitive, like overly sensitive or overreacting, or like actually no, this is a really dangerous situation for you or the kids. So let's see. Okay, so I think in terms of, we'll move on then from the conflict. I think we've talked about that. So let's kind of, we're down to about our last 10 minutes or so. So let's talk about any special strategies that if we have somebody who is newly, how do you get off to a good start? Newly divorced, just stepping into this, what are some things to do to get that off to a good start?
Okay, so I feel like there's a lot of commitment when you're transitioning one stage of your life. Right. So the first and foremost commitment I think you need to make is to accept that the relationship that you once had with that person is over. You know, it's going to be a completely different. So this kind of goes along with this idea of leaving the past. And that doesn't mean you get over it or you forget it, you know, those unresolved feelings, but it means you're choosing to cope with them and deal with them a little differently. So your primary focus now is on the well-being of your kids. You're committing to putting them first, not again to triangulate or manipulate or disparage, but their well-being should be your number one priority. I think there also needs to be a commitment to acting you know, taking the high road again, really working on choosing your battles wisely, and not, you know, giving in to those defensive patients, right?
So being very intentional and thoughtful about, okay, this is going to be hard, but here are some things that I can do. I'm going to take the high road. I'm going to, you know, not let my emotions take over in a situation. I'm going to work on my healing. I'm going to take good care of myself. I'm going to remember my kid first, even if the other person isn't doing that, and just starting off that way.
Yeah, because again, like you're responsible for you. So you can't change what the other person is doing, but your kids are still looking to you for help with this really difficult condition. It's difficult for the adult, it's 100% more difficult for the kids. Exactly. Even if it's in their best interest, ultimately.
I think too, like even going back to the idea of what you said about the choosing your battles, and keeping that in mind too, that, you know, you may, if it's, let's say the child is like 2, you may want to map out what the whole future is, like who's going to pay for college, who's going to do this, that, and the other thing. But really to take your time, like some things it is helpful to plan out in advance, like certainly things like holidays, schedules, things like that is helpful. But you can't possibly anticipate every single thing, and really almost just taking that focus, like for the next few months, like here's what this is going to look like, you know, and just trying to stay really in the moment, because I think that can be a challenge in the beginning too. There's so much uncertainty. There can be so much fear about what that's going to look like. and for people then to just be able to say, okay, like for this week, you know, this is what the schedule is going to look like. This is how I'm going to act. I'm still upset. I'm still reeling with my emotions. But this week, my goal is, you know, to really enjoy my time when I have my child, and when my child is with their other parent, I'm going to take a walk with a friend. You know, and that could be a successful first week, and that helps to set things off on a good start.
Yeah. I think in life we have to learn to compartmentalize a bit, and I think people can take that to an unhealthy extreme, obviously. But, I mean, there were days that I'm not feeling my best, or things are going on, and yet I have to come to work, and I have to act as if I'm fine and be there for my clients. You know, we all have that responsibility in different ways.
That's right.
So it's the same thing. You know, if you've got stuff going on as a result of this divorce, you've got to find ways to deal with that. But you do have to be present for your kids.
Exactly.
You know, be with them in the moment and be the best version of yourself that you can be.
And I think too, like even kind of that same idea of being in the moment, like just for people to understand as time passes then, so we kind of started with the immediate aftermath. But as time passes, like people need to remember it's normal, like sometimes it's going to feel better and sometimes it's going to feel worse, just like any relationship is going to feel that way. And so if you're in a season where it's kind of a rough patch, that it can go right back up, just like it'll probably go back down again. You know, it's going to be like that. But I do want to talk a little bit. Let's say there's co-parents that it did not get off to a good start. And so and then let's say over time you're realizing, man, this is really impacting my kid. Or you just both people are kind of like, you know what, it's time for us to kind of settle the past and really work together. So what if two parents did not get off to a good start, and it could even be really ugly, there could have been a custody case or something like that, how can they kind of leave that part of the past? So we've talked a little bit about how do you end the marriage or end the relationship. How do you then even kind of put the negative co-parenting even post-divorce or post-end of the relationship in the past so you can change course?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that there is a clear answer to that, honestly. I do think it's possible. You know, again, like I said earlier, I mean, I think every couple should have hope that they can learn a healthier co-parenting dynamic, even if it doesn't start off that way. So, you know, sometimes it's just about recommitting, like, to what you had hoped to start out with, but maybe got away from. And parenting plans, we didn't talk about this earlier, but they can be used a lot, and that might be done legally or with a mediator or drafted by a counselor or somebody, but where you've got these kind of objectives that you're hoping to stick with some flexibility. So coming back to that and kind of revising or revamping. But sometimes, again, true with any relationship, it's accepting, you know, responsibility for yourself. It's making amends, expressing remorse. And that is so important for kids too. You know, it's never too late to show for your child that you can do things differently. Right? So modeling for them those kinds of behaviors is going to teach them really valuable lessons. So, you know, to see these two parents who haven't gotten along well for all these months or years decide just to bury the hatchet, like once and for all, and commit to doing it differently can be so helpful for the kids to see.
Yeah, it's great modeling for the parents. And we should add, like, obviously this is not something that every co-parents can achieve. If there's a history and continued abuse or something like that, that is not always, but that it is possible. And especially, I think a lot of times for people, it is over time, and as people kind of move forward in their lives and as kids are getting older, there are often new opportunities to kind of say, you know what, let's bury the hatchet. Let's just put this behind us. Let's try to have a positive dynamic going forward, especially, I think, you know, kind of keeping the long-range view of, well, when grandkids might arrive someday, or what do we want graduations and weddings to be? Like, I don't want to ruin my kid's wedding because, you know, I'm still dealing with this tension from, you know, years or decades ago. You know, so kind of thinking about those sort of things. And also, it could be the vision of what the better place might have been, or that more positive. maybe you're not going to be best friends, but maybe it's enough to just be able to say, you know, hello, how are you?
Right.
How's life been going for you?
Right.
And even that could be a huge step.
Yeah.
But I think especially as kids get older, having those conversations with them too, to say, you know, well, what do you want? Sometimes kids actually are really uncomfortable when their parents have been conflicted, and then they're like, what's going on, you know? And so sometimes kids don't even really want their parents to be friends again. You know, they're kind of, they've accepted it, but to talk with them about that.
And we didn't mention this before, but I think it's an important note to make that kids will oftentimes pull away from parents that they see not parenting well, right? Like they're not going to want to be in relationship with them as much. And sometimes that can be a wake-up call.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
That would be a wake-up call, right? Like, I need to get it together. You know, my kid doesn't want to be around me. They're refusing coming to my house on the weekends, you know, or when there are these events, they don't want me to be there.
Yeah.
That's how it might be. So, you know, in a perfect world, we can have that awareness and recognize that things have gone too far off the rails, you know?
Absolutely. And I think for people to be realistic about that, that it's not, oh, it's the phase that the kid's going to grow out of, but maybe it's like, actually, they're responding to me. Yeah, it could be permanent and something that, you know, carries into adulthood. Let's see. I think since we're running real low on time now, do we have any questions? Okay.
Yes, we do. So in situations where there is spousal abuse, how can the survivor keep themselves healthy and stay safe in co-parenting situations where the other spouse has some custody?
Okay, so that's a good question. You know, obviously, I would hope that person is in counseling somewhere. I mean, anytime there's an abusive situation going on, we need to be processing that with a trained professional. And that can be really scary. I mean, knowing that your kid's going, you know, to this house with a person who has potential to be destructive at the very least. So, you know, I would say again, you know, you got to practice some patience and also I think tune in to nuances in your kid's mood and behavior and what's going on. Certainly that might help alleviate any anxieties you have. Or on the flip side of that coin, kind of push you into taking other action if it's like you're learning. But practicing really good self-care, finding outlets for yourself. I mean, all of that stuff that we mentioned, I think is so important.
I would add to safety planning around custody visitation. I know we've done some research with survivors of domestic violence, and a lot of times custody exchanges specifically can be very dangerous situations. So it may be, like you mentioned earlier, in those cases, making sure there's the third party, either who is managing the exchanges or who is with the survivor, especially if there's any safety risks that might involve, and it could be emotional safety too. So being able to, you know, shut the door if the person is verbally attacking you, or learning to walk away, or learning not to respond in those situations. So again, I'm glad you mentioned the professional help, because I think that that is really important. But those can be really volatile situations.
Those are cases that I think warrant more of a parallel parenting.
Absolutely.
You know, like, I don't know that I would ever advise someone who's been in an abusive situation, emotionally or otherwise, to be direct contact with that person. There still is a threat of safety.
Yeah, and then it even too, I would add, kind of even just looking at how they're communicating too. It may not be any communication is in person over the phone. It's all over email, text message, so you have the documentation if they're a threat. But yeah, that's a good question, and that's a really complicated one. Were there other questions that came in? Well, so I guess as we're kind of wrapping up, what are your kind of big picture takeaways, or your kind of, what do you hope that people who are listening to this program will walk away from this with?
I mean, I've said hope multiple times. I mean, I think that it's such a challenging undertaking, especially early on in the separation course. It's normal to have feelings. It's normal to feel those feelings for a period of time. You know, again, we can't just expect ourselves to stop, you know, or get over things. This could have been years of hurt that has developed. But it is possible to move forward into this different phase of your relationship with your ex and have an effective co-parenting relationship. There is hope.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's my biggest takeaway. But that does sometimes mean digging a little deeper, not trying to stick that square peg in a round hole over and over again, and really committing to staying kid-focused.
Yeah.
Our kids are watching us. They're taking in everything we're saying, everything we're doing. They notice what's happening in the families, whether we want to admit it or not. So we got to do what's best for them.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that, and I would say, too, kind of another way of thinking about it is just really be intentional and give it some time. It's not going to be an ideal situation right away. Give it some time, let it evolve, and let it evolve in the way that needs to evolve for you, your child, and your unique circumstances. And use a lot of the things that we've talked about today around sort of being intentional, whether that's resolving emotions, healing, being intentional about how you interact with the other person, and just being intentional about, as you just said, keeping the focus on the child. Like the child's well-being and their adjustment is really the most important thing for parents to be keeping in mind.
Yeah, if we want to set them up for success, we have to commit to parenting.
Yeah.
That's just the bottom line.
Yep, exactly. Any other final thoughts?
I think that's it.
Okay, well, good. Well, that really covered it. We did a great job kind of talking about all these different pieces. So thank you again for being here. It's a great discussion. I can tell that you have really worked with a lot of families who are dealing with this, and you've learned a lot from those experiences, and we're grateful that you're here to share that today. We hope that you also enjoyed this program, and we're really grateful that you took the time to be with us today. We welcome your feedback. Please go ahead and click on the link to take the feedback form so that you can give us some input to help us improve these programs. The next Relationship Booster will be on, the live program will be on Friday, November 1st at 12 o'clock p.m. And the topic for that one will be Parenting Out of Wholeness, Not Brokenness, which actually sounds like a really good follow-up to today's discussion too. So thank you so much, and we hope that the information covered today will be helpful in helping you to have happier, healthier, and safer relationships.